Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. On the line with us to kick off this week's program, investigative researcher at the Capital Research Center, Hayden Ludwig, is on with us. First off, happy weekend, Hayden, and thanks for joining us. How are you, sir?
Thanks, Joe. I'm well. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. Now, you've unearthed something that I think conversationally a lot of folks know, that Tom Steyer or Michael Bloomberg or Terry McAuliffe has big efforts on winning political offices for other folks, investing in House of Delegates races and state Senate races. But you found dark money as well coming in as well. Tell us what you found.
Sure. So we at the Capital Research Center uncovered a massive network of nonprofits running groups we call pop-up groups. These are websites designed to look like full-fledged activist nonprofits. This group is controlled by a small philanthropy consulting company in D.C. called Arabella Advisors. And this nonprofit is massive. We counted about $500 million in revenues in 2017 alone. Between 2013 and 2017, that's about $1.6 billion just between these four political nonprofits.
Now, I've heard the phrase pop-ups coming up most frequently in relationship to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her campaign to unseat the congressman from the Astoria and Bronx sections of New York. Is this something where people are starting to hear this, but it's been going on for a while?
Well, I definitely think that, our report definitely makes headway into one of the favorite tactics of the left that you don't see on the right, for instance. So people on our side tend to not be familiar with it. And I'll explain a little bit what that model looks like. So you have donors. You mentioned Steyer. Soros would be another one that people are familiar with. These are billionaires who like to give tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars away every election cycle, obviously in order to influence politics. They usually do this through, say, 501c3 or C4 nonprofits that are allowed to do some amount of lobbying.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that takes a long time. It can take months in order to clear all that paperwork at the IRS.
Unless you're conservative groups, we found out you might never pass the IRS, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah, no kidding. As we expose, so there's a way to tamper with these things, right? Well, what we found with this Arabella network that makes it unusual is that Arabella basically exists to speed that process along.
Ooh.
So if you're a billionaire, you give money to Arabella, they put that money into their nonprofits, and then those nonprofits build, it could be dozens, any number of websites that, again, look like they're pop-up groups. They're activist groups. They can run campaigns against any issue you want. So, for instance, we found them on healthcare, pushing Obamacare. We found them pushing gun control, pro-abortion policies in the Department of Health and Human Services. The list goes on.
Well, this almost sounds like what we found the Internet Research Agency out of St. Petersburg, Russia, doing, is creating sites that aren't really what they appear to be, and saying, look, tens of thousands of your friends agree with us. Why don't you come along with us? And is there no law that says if you set yourself up as a nonprofit, you have to show some nonprofit work that you're doing, or is that kind of nebulous?
Well, it's pretty nebulous, as most things with the IRS, and I don't want to give you an impression that we found anything illegal. We certainly didn't. But we did find that the same people who are constantly talking about philanthropy and transparency are hypocrites about this, because they're obviously anything but transparent.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it works is these websites can collect money, and that money goes to real nonprofits. It goes to these four Arabella-controlled nonprofits. I'll give you an example. When we were at the Supreme Court tracking left-wing protests last year for the Kavanaugh hearings, we found one such group called Demand Justice.
I've
go to its website. Go ahead.
No, I've heard of them. Yeah, no. So what did you find about them?
We found that Demand Justice, if you go to their website, what you find is it looks like any other left-wing activist group like the League of Conservation Voters or Planned Parenthood. They even have a donate button there. And so if you give them money, you think you're going to support this anti-Trump group if you're a lefty, right? Well, it turns out that money actually goes to a group you've probably never heard about called the 1630 Fund. Dig a little deeper into their K Street address, and you find that actually these guys are tied to a massive left-wing dark money network, the Arabella-controlled network. There's 340-plus organizations that we found like this with the same exact business model.
And they all come back to this this Arabella advisors. So is there, in this collusive behavior, and I'm going to use the double point scoreboard, so they're working it. These folks then can dodge, is it election contribution laws? I mean, we at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, for example, are very careful about taking political sides because, that's not how we're constituted. We are a nonprofit policy group. It has nothing to do with who wins the election or who doesn't win an election. It's about the policies we see and we do research into. Sounds very similar to yours. Are these groups working in some gray area where they're allowed to dodge that?
That's right. CRC is the same kind of organization. Well, the way these guys work is they're very, very careful not to violate any laws, as far as I can tell. And I did a lot of digging into these guys. What they do instead is they actually subdivide their nonprofit network into 3 501c3 nonprofits and 1 501c4 that's just fancy for lobbying nonprofit. That's the 1630 Fund. And the reason we think they do this is they can maximize the various advantages to these two types of groups. Sparing you all the boring details, what it basically comes down to is nonprofits like the Capital Research Center or you guys can take tax-deductible donations. So when people make donations to you, obviously, they can write that off on their annual taxes. Well, for 501c4 lobbying groups, these are nonprofits, but they're not allowed to deduct your taxes when you give them a donation. So what that effectively means is they can do more lobbying instead, and it's not you don't get a tax deduction for it. So why would they do this? Well, the way they structure it is they have pop-up groups that are run by the 501c3 arms and then the C4 arms. The C3 arms collect a lot of the money, while the C4 arms do a lot of the lobbying.
Oh.
And they can have that relationship back and forth as long as they're careful to report it under the real nonprofits' names, the Arabella ones.
So they're actually taking tax. Oh, I see what the real scam. So they're taking, let's say, $50, just to use a number, and that's tax-free for the contributor, and then they're able to send that right into lobbying. So they found a way around, the separation of this. You talk about transparency and hypocrisy, Hayden. This is the same thing. Aren't these the same folks who will routinely yell in my face about Citizens United?
It's exactly right. They're on the same side of the aisle as the End Citizens United folks. I always love this because liberals are always demanding transparency laws, and then we go ahead and expose these mega funders who are very, very reluctant to reveal their own dark streams of cash. And the better part about this too is this network of nonprofits. These guys are on the bleeding edge of activism, but they're hiding behind what they call strategic philanthropy. It's a great euphemism for what they're doing. Yeah,
it's chilling sounding, actually, Hayden. So what do we have to do? I mean, you found it. Are you getting any traction? Are you going to be on CNN this weekend exposing this? Oh, that didn't sound like a good laugh, did it?
Well, we're working on stuff like that. Here's our hope, is we're trying to get out this message, that while the left is very quick to criticize what they call dark money on the right, say from the Koch brothers, their favorite people to point to, there's obviously dark money streams that are comparable in size, maybe even bigger on the left, that we're just now starting to expose. So we want really people to, when they hear that phrase dark money, when they hear that spoken by the left, what we want them to think is that effectively means money that supports the speech that the left wants to silence, not some grand conspiracy here. And I would also add, too, that we're not actually trying to encourage people to force what they call donor disclosure laws, because we believe in anonymity. And here's why. Go back to the American Revolution. It was the writers like Publius writing under pseudonyms that were able to get out their message of patriotism, that what if they had to write under their own names, right? This is all about the free speech protections that the First Amendment allows people. We don't want to get rid of that. What we want is the left to call its own dark money funders what they are. They're mega funders hiding behind their dark money streams that they're so quick to criticize on our side.
me ask you this then, Hayden, since the new whipping, well, I guess not whipping boy, but, subject matter that the left is fixated with is the president's tax returns. And they want his tax returns, I presume, so that they can find things that they could charge him for because they think they've got some sort of, process crime that they can catch him. But I worry that there's more going on to this because they want that kind of skullthuggery, as I call it, which is the secret. Oh, we found that you gave money to this group, and all of a sudden you're getting called into human resources because you gave money to some group that your company doesn't like, or there's a protest march outside of your shop because you're found to have given money to it. It's the same reason we have a secret ballot, isn't it, Hayden? That you're supposed to be able to have your opinions and not have the mob try to dissuade you just because there's more of them.
I think you nailed it. I mean, look, dark money is a political term, not a scientific term, not an accurate term, and it's used by people on the left to demand the government force donors' names to be disclosed. And I'll give you a good example of where I think this fight has to start on our side. It's calling the left on its nonsense, right? Mm-hmm. Take Senator Sheldon Whitehouse out of Rhode Island. He's probably the face of the left's attack on quote-unquote dark money. Yeah. Well, we found some interesting things. He takes money from a group called the League of Conservation Voters. Mm-hmm. That's a major environmental activist group. Well, it turns out the League of Conservation Voters has been criticized by left-leaning groups like the Center for Responsive Politics as a dark money heavyweight. That's their terms. Well, it gets better. We found that the League of Conservation Voters regularly gives and gets money from the Arabella network. And if you look even deeper, you find that Eric Kessler, an ex-Clinton administration guy who runs Arabella Advisors and is president of two of the nonprofits, that he himself used to work at the League of Conservation Voters. Jeez. So this massive dark network money, it's a huge circle that's constantly, one end connects to the other, and it's just moving tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars each year.
Well, and you want to know, and I guess the White House story is, I've been around this business too long, Hayden. It doesn't surprise me, but this is the kind of thing you say, oh, well, so-and-so here in Virginia, we have a big campaign where the left wants to forbid Dominion from contributing to elected officials' campaigns because those elected officials at some point will bear oversight over Dominion. I think there's a better way to deal with electric utilities, and it doesn't involve the government. But it seems like these folks want to have their cake and eat it too. That's what really, if I'm understanding you correctly, bothers you guys at the Capital Research Center is the hypocrisy, not even so much the existence of it, because we can't hold somebody accountable if we don't know who's buying and paying their lunches.
You know what? I think you're right. I agree with you. We understand the concern a lot of people have about billionaires buying elections. That's a pretty common topic these days. And there's something to be said about that. But let's remember that donor disclosure rules, as the left wants them, would target regular Americans who want to support causes of their choice, be it nonprofits, candidates, whatever. That infringes on their right to privacy and free speech. And remember, this is at a time when people are physically attacked for expressing their opinions by radicals like Antifa.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We've seen it here in Charlottesville. As a matter of fact, we may become the new capital city of that kind of behavior, Hayden. So what is the outcome you would like to see out of this? Better disclosure laws? I'm of the mind that more government regulation never makes anything better, because once these guys start writing it, there's always, the more layers you put on something, the more loopholes you put into it. It seems like this group has found its way through one.
I'm very skeptical of, like you said, adding new rules and laws onto the books. I tend to think most of our laws are pretty effective as is, and these guys are always going to be able to outsmart the bureaucrats in D.C. If there's any outcome that I can point to that we like, it's that, frankly, we would want people to, when they hear that term dark money, know that it's nonsense. Know that this is a political expression used by people who themselves are often funded by the same criteria of dark money funders that they want to shut down. And our hope is that people would recognize that for the political term it is and frankly, stop using it. Move on and recognize that free speech relies on the free access of money and right to privacy that Americans have enjoyed since the revolution.
Let me ask you this, Hayden. We're talking with Hayden Ludwig from the Capital Research Center. He's their investigative researcher, and I don't want to pull you out of your milieu, Hayden, but you've got me thinking in terms of money and elections, and it seems like there's an inverse equation where the more money, and every year it's more and more money gets spent on elections, and fewer of us actually show up to vote. And maybe the president in his campaign, because I think he spent quite a bit of his own money and didn't do a lot of the traditional fundraising that certainly the Clinton Foundation had done. Are we at a point where Americans, the more money you spend on attack ads that run during my favorite football game or my NASCAR race, is actually driving us out of the polling place? And is that even a subtext of what they want to do? They just want to drive away the average voter and just keep the specialists on the right and the left?
It's an interesting question. I'm always hesitant to speak to their intent because I can measure their outcomes and what they do, of course. I tend to think one of the things I study is I look at some immigration, and some of our work was had to do with the caravans that were breaking last October, right? We were one of the groups that found that there were left-wing activists in the U.S. that were helping to organize those things. And what I've kind of come to a conclusion, personally speaking, is I tend to think that many groups on the left are dissatisfied with your average American. They don't trust your average American to vote, quote-unquote, the right way. And if you look at a lot of the directions they take this country, say with ending the Citizens United Supreme Court ruling for 2010, it kind of shows a certain cynicism that we want different voters. We want people who support our ideas, and we don't really trust you to be won over. And we'd rather not have that battle of ideas. We'd rather just win and have our way and and never actually have to run a real campaign that convinces anybody to support our ideas, because their ideas are typically ludicrous, right? They're lunatics.
Well, and I think it leads to less minimalist government, because then, bless their hearts, I'm sure there are people who get to Washington or Richmond and say, well, I promised these folks I was going to do all these things for them, so now I'm going to set out to do it, and let me get some folks to help me. And it may not even be from an unhealthy place. They're just trying to keep campaign promises. We the people have to stop asking them to do things for us, and maybe that would put a stop to a lot of this. But that also leads to places like Mark Zuckerberg going before the FCC saying, please regulate me some more, or more appropriately, regulate anyone else who might want to do what I do, and I'll help you do it. That bigger state leads to this kind of thing. It's one of those, it may be more correlation, not causation, but it seems like the more this happens, the bigger the government gets overseeing, and therefore more important that we have lobbyists, kind of making sure our business gets what it needs.
I think you're absolutely right on that stuff. I mean, I just look at Senator Whitehouse again, and when's he going to come out and criticize his own dark money donors like the League of Conservation Voters? I'm still waiting on that. I'm waiting on the New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, groups that are so quick to criticize the Koch brothers and so-called dark money right-wing interests, right? I'm waiting for them to do a report like we just released, attacking their own side and saying, hey, wait a minute, you're just as guilty, if not more guilty, of spreading dark money around than anybody on the right is. I'm still waiting on them to do that because, that's true journalism, isn't it? Calling your side on its own stuff, being consistent.
Well, I'd like to think so. I've been told I'm not helping because the left-wing media won't call out their side, but the right-wing media always seems to call out their side for when we get caught in hypocrisy. Maybe it's because we like to sleep at night. Hayden, I was struck by something back in 2009. I was at the Virginia Association of Broadcasters summer conference, and still a member. Didn't leave, but there was a whole presentation on how much money was available for broadcasters if they were able to come up with creative ways to promote Obamacare. And this was coming directly from the Department of Health and Human Services, never mind what could be coming from nebulous organizations that are just looking to help out and working in the periphery. So, I agree with you. I don't like the phrase dark money because it sounds like something illegal is going on. But, at some point, I also trust the American people to if given all the information, make their own choices. I worry that we get into a place where the left has gotten us admitting that the voters can't be trusted up to make up their own mind because of, dark money and all the, the internet research agencies as well. I still trust people if given all the information. Is that a fair thing to say?
Oh, I'm completely in the same boat as you. I trust Americans, and that's why Capital Research Center exists. We're not out there to tilt elections. We're out there to give people information. We want people to be equipped with this stuff, and that's why we don't operate in the dark, unlike the groups we report on.
Yeah. CapitalResearch.org is where you find them online. Hayden, thank you so much for this, and there's a piece right there that you can read on the left-wing dark money, the hypocrisy that it is. But thank you so much for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Thanks, Joe.
And coming up next, Neil McCluskey from the Cato Institute. More money going into places you didn't expect it. Education cost and government subsidizations of higher education. Coming up next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.